Roger Dykes, it is so good to have you ready to go in the studio. A lot of people don't appreciate how you get ready and get set up to go in the studio, and here you are.
Here I am.
You know, we got some interesting stuff we're going to talk about on this podcast, but before we get her kicked off here, you went to a remarkable event at the Buddy Holly Center in Lubbock, Texas last night. Did you not?
Yes, I certainly did, because I was privileged to be taken to a concert by my all-time favorite singing group, the Sons of the Pioneers.
Well, I thought you were going to say like the Rolling Stones or something like that. You're talking about the Sons of the Pioneers.
Yes. Many of our listeners will know who that is. Some of our listeners may not even know who they are. But they were the backup group for Roy Rogers in his movies and on his road shows and rodeo presentations and things like that. Of course, Roy's the one that originated the group in the first place. So I have been a fan for as long as I can remember. As a small child, I thoroughly enjoyed listening to the Sons of the Pioneers.
There is not a bigger Roy Rogers fan than you.
Well, I don't know about that, but I am a big one, yes.
If people could tour your home and see your office where you do this podcast from and look at the pictures on the wall, and they're the original deals. You have some amazing photographs of Roy Rogers and Dale Evans, and it doesn't take long to figure out you're a big Roy Rogers fan.
Yes, I've had people come in my home here as caregivers who obviously are younger, and they ask if that was a picture of my mom and dad, because I have pictures of Roy Rogers and Dale Evans around through the house, and I have no pictures of my mom and dad. My mom and dad never did like to take pictures, so I don't have any.
They weren't big picture. And we're going to be talking about your dad and your mom here coming up in a few minutes. But because of the way it pertains to another thing that we're going to cover on today's show. And but you enjoyed the show at the Buddy Holly Center.
Absolutely. It was a wonderful show. And the auditorium that I was privileged to be in as an audience participant was perfectly arranged for wheelchairs. I've not been in an auditorium better arranged for wheelchairs, and there were lots of wheelchairs there last night.
That's great. And the crowd, was it a bunch of teenagers or what?
No, I would say about 95% of the crowd was at 70 years old or more.
Well, of course. Yeah. And you know, the closer you get to 70 years old, the more you realize, that ain't nothing. Well, people can do anything.
The thing that fascinated me was I saw at least one young couple there with two small children, and I would have loved to ask them why they were there. In other words, what was it? How did they know the Sons of the Pioneers? Because they were too young to have ever seen them, in the movies or whatever, in the theater. Yeah. So how did they know about them, and why were they there?
Well, they were there because mom and dad couldn't get a babysitter.
And maybe
probably.
So.
Yeah. And that is a great thing to expose kids to a whole entire another way of life and genre of music that they're not going to get a chance to hear anywhere else, probably.
Nope.
Yeah.
Not likely.
Well, I'm glad you did that. You know, you were the perfect guy to be in the audience, and that's not the first time you have met those guys. I understand we have pictures. We may get to show them on a blog or something here, but pictures of you and Dusty Rogers, who is the son of Roy Rogers and a participant in the show on stage. And Dusty came out and met you, and you guys had actually met before some time back, and he remembered you.
So he said, yes. They were here. They were here about 15 years ago, I think, or a little more.
Yeah.
The Sons of the Pioneers and Dusty, they did one of our the Tech Western weekends, and it was around my birthday, and my mother and dad arranged it with their schedule so that I was allowed and permitted to go and see any and everything that they had that weekend. And so in the process, I met Dusty.
Well, that's just great. Well, we just wanted to mention that as we kicked off this episode of Roger Dykes Just Saying. That was a big deal when that happened last night. And I am so glad that you had a friend that got you out there and made it all work. And that was great.
Yes. Because without that friend, I would never have had the opportunity.
Yeah, so I know who it was. He's a pretty good guy.
Right. And he did something for me that you could have brought all the Sons of the Pioneers in every weekend, and I still wouldn't get to see them if I didn't have someone like him to take me to the show. So perfect. It was much appreciated.
We're going to talk about an episode in your life that is actually pretty doggone interesting, and it wasn't a simple thing. It was radical as far as I'm concerned. We're going to tell people what we're talking about here. We're going to do that when we come right back. Roger Dykes Just Saying underway. Roger, stay where you're at. We'll be right back. Hello, I'm Michael Shawn, and welcome to Roger Dykes Just Sayin'. Roger Dykes is a teacher and counselor with a master's degree in family counseling from Texas Tech University. He is the owner of UV Blake Records and has written a book titled Non-Persons Rolling in a Normal World. And there's a few more things. Roger was born with cerebral palsy. Now a quadriplegic, he has been confined most of his life to a wheelchair. And for a while, even enjoying a career as a stand-up or sit-down comedian and after-dinner speaker. Disabled? Yes, but you forget about that pretty quickly because Roger thrives. So here is Roger Dykes.
Good morning, Michael. Good morning, podcast listeners. We're glad you're here.
Oh, man. Are we ever? Hey, you've got quite a bit of people listening to your show now. I mean, the numbers consistently grow. So congratulations, Roger.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. And I'm thankful for all the listeners we just on.
All right. So, Roger, let's get right into this. I guess it's okay to say you were sent away to a special facility to teach and train you on some things. And you were gone for a year, and it was down at Galveston. And what age were you when all this took place?
I was 12, fixing to be 13. I would turn 13 while I was down there.
That is really young, 12 years old. And I knew I didn't get a chance to meet your mom, but I spoke 2 or 3 times with your dad and got to meet him, and would come by your place for one reason or another. And when your dad was still there, and I mean, he was a really nice guy, and I appreciated your dad. And I have heard enough stories about your mom to realize she was a doting mom. And she cared, they both cared very much for you.
Oh, absolutely.
And that being said, Roger, to take a 12-year-old child. Now, I understand send them off to camp for 3 or 4 weeks or something like that, but to take a 12-year-old child completely disabled and confined somewhat to a wheelchair and send them off for like a year, that is a decision that had to be tough to make. Can you tell us, first of all, the circumstances that would have led them to make that decision?
Well, you got to back up in time to the mid-50s, late 50s, early 60s. At that point in time, the medical profession was under the impression that if you were walking as a cerebral palsy person, you were that much closer to being normal, and that was the goal, was to get every handicapped cerebral palsy person who wasn't walking up with crutches and braces or whatever equipment they needed to be able to walk. So I wasn't walking. Now, I just had major surgery a few years earlier in Galveston. And the doctors who did the surgery and were behind that were also the doctors who came up with the idea of me going to Moody State School. Moody State School was a facility that was primarily physically for the physically disabled of various kinds, not just cerebral palsy, but various kinds. And their primary goal was to get everyone up and walking. And so since Roger wasn't walking, it was determined that maybe Roger should go down there and they could do some sort of miraculous work, and Roger would come back walking and be, quote, normal, unquote.
Well, so it had to be something radical, like what you just described, because I cannot, for the life of me, comprehend the fact that your mom and dad allowed you to be taken off into this Moody Institute, and for a year of your life at age 12. And yet that's what happened.
Well, my mother and dad were convinced that I would one day be walking, and they were going to take every effort that was humanly possible for that to take place. I don't have time to recount everything that had happened to me before Moody, but I had been to every doctor. I'd been to charlatans. I'd been everything short of a faith healer that mom and dad heard about that might do some good. And they were dedicated parents and wanted what was best for me, and they wanted to put me in or get me into whatever therapy would serve the purpose. My physical therapy started when I was 18 months old, and did not stop until I was 16.
Yeah. So you were taken down. Your parents took you down there. Is that correct?
Yes. It was all arranged, and I was dropped off lovingly, and I mean that seriously. They were not being ugly at all. It was strictly a matter of this was a possibility of getting Roger normal or more normal. And so I'm sure I know my mother was not happy about it, but it seemed at the time to be necessary.
If you could come back walking, they were willing to make whatever sacrifice they had to make.
Right. They believed that was the goal, because that's what the medical profession was pushing, was walking, nothing short of that. And so I had braces, I had crutches. I'd been walking since I was able to walk with braces and crutches all the way back, but it was not independent. And the key at Moody was going to be that I would come back independently walking without any help.
How did you, as a 12-year-old child, how did you feel about this whole thing?
Homesick.
Yeah.
From the day they dropped me off until the day 1 year later when they picked me up, I was basically homesick the entire time. And there's not much more miserable feeling than that. The homesickness was not only because I was away from home, that being obvious, but I was put into an environment that I had never seen or been close to. And that is, excuse me, I was the oldest client, and I don't know the patient, I'm not sure what the right word is.
Yeah.
But I was the oldest child to have ever been left at Moody State School, because normally they shut everything off at 12, and I would turn 13 while I was there. But that was not really, the age difference was there. And that was a problem because everybody was younger, considerably younger than I was. So I didn't have there were no friends. All my friends were in Lubbock, and they were at school in places where I was, church and so forth.
Yeah.
Now I'm put into an environment where no one is my age, A, and B, most of the clients there were typically mentally challenged by their disability.
And you were not mentally challenged.
Not in the least. And so I have no one to talk to. I have no one to be friends with. I can't make friends because they don't know how. For example, the only games that those individuals knew how to play were Candyland and Chutes and Ladders. I'd been playing 42 and chess. And so it was I can play Chutes and Ladders, but it's not a lot of fun.
Yeah.
So as a result, this added to my despondency. And for the first few days that I was there, I was basically in tears the whole time.
Sure.
I didn't want to eat. I didn't want to do anything. And that, needless to say, that bothered the staff there. They knew I wouldn't be joyfully happy, but they didn't want me miserable the entire time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I stayed miserable until one afternoon, and I cannot say this any other way than by providential care. Two of the attendants who had befriended me came up to me about 3:30 in the afternoon, and they said, how would you like to go on coffee break with us? Well, I've loved coffee all my life.
Oh, okay.
And how they knew that, I don't know. I don't know that I told anyone. But of course, that was off limits to any of the clients because they didn't want coffee.
They were kids.
Right.
Yeah.
And I was not used to drinking milk at every meal, and that's what we had at every meal. So all of a sudden, I think for the first time in however long I'd been there, a smile went across my face of going, wow, adult activity. This sounds like fun. So they pushed me down the hall. The kids didn't miss me. They didn't care where I went. They pushed me down the hall to the break room. And they poured my cup of coffee for me and helped me get it drunk, and enjoyed the fact that I had stopped crying for the first time. So that was the beginning of what would become a regular activity every afternoon around 3:30. Roger disappeared and had a cup of coffee with friends, and that was a little bit of help, but that was only one out of 24 hours a day.
Treated you. They treated you more like the developed human being that you were, instead of trying to treat you like some grade school kid.
Right, exactly. And as I said, none of this bothered. It wasn't like I was doing something that the other kids wished they could do, because I wasn't. Here's how they fed us at Moody State School. You went into the dining room, there were three plates on the three containers on the table for the kids that could feed themselves. There was one plate, a knife, and a fork for the attendant who cut up the food for anybody that needed it, and fed one child. And they had you had one person at your table that couldn't feed themselves.
Yeah.
And that's what the attendant did. So I come in the first day, and I don't know what we had, but let's assume for the moment we had roast beef, and we had potatoes, and we had green beans, okay?
Okay.
When I get to the table, all of that's in one bowl, a small bowl. It's just dumped together. And I have a spoon to eat it with because no one was allowed to have a fork because they might hurt themselves.
Yeah.
Needless to say, that did not go over well. But I didn't have any other way of dealing with this. What I'm saying is I'm not making it sound like a prisoner of war camp. I'm trying to make it, I want the listeners to appreciate where I came from and what I went to.
That would have never happened. Back home.
No, it would never happen here. Mom and Dad had taught me how to use a fork. I couldn't cut anything up. I still can't. But I used a fork, and but the reason I could use all that's because they had bought special plates for me that were heavy enough that they didn't slide. So I could use a fork and no problem. Well, after about the second or third day, I came to a realization. If I got to the table first, ahead of anybody else, I would pull the plate over and lick the fork. And that became mine. And the kid that couldn't feed himself, my logic was the kid that can't feed himself doesn't know how he's getting anyway. I do, so I will. So we switched it out, and every day they'd come in. Of course, the plate was in front of me. I'd already licked the fork, and the attendant had to go get another fork or feed the kid out of the bowl.
If you snooze, you lose.
That's right. So we learned these things, you see. Well, I also learned and made friends with, which is my normal way of operation. I try to always make friends with people in all the right places. So one of my friends worked in the cafeteria, in the kitchen.
Oh.
We would have occasionally, rarely, but occasionally we would have ice cream. That was a rarity.
There you go.
It was a teeny tiny bowl with one dip of ice cream. I'm used to eating a fairly large bowl with 2 or 3 dips of ice cream. Okay, so that was not particularly satisfying either. So what I learned was that if I ate slow, very slow, and I wasn't finished eating before everybody left, that the lady, her name was Irene, that worked in the cafeteria, Irene would bring me a second or third bowl of ice cream. I couldn't do that as long as there was anybody in there.
So you were playing Irene.
Yes. I was playing everybody.
Okay, can I point something out here? Excuse me, just a second. Hold the thought. What I'm hearing is, even at that age, 12 years old, 13 years old, Roger Dykes was the person that I know today. And that is, you have this most incredible skill of figuring out, not being normal, of figuring out a situation where you can actually get what you want or what you need. And you do that to this day. It's not easy for you, and it usually takes some thought. But even then, at that time, you looked at the system and figured out what you needed to do to get that second bowl of ice cream.
Absolutely.
And nobody else at your table did that.
Nobody else could think that fast. It
was a natural thing for you to do. That was Roger Dykes.
Right. Roger got a lot of basic training at Moody State School. I was put in a world where I was required to survive on my own at in my mind, whatever it took, short of being dishonest, but whatever it took to get what I needed. So in the process, we're going along here, and in the process, I'm still doing the coffee break. I'm getting a little ice cream on the side. One of the things that you need to know to make this story make sense is that I, at home for 12 years of my life, I went to bed when my parents went to bed. I was not a child that they put to bed early like many children are. I required not a great deal of sleep, and so I stayed up as long as they did. They usually went to bed around 10 after they watched the news or whatever. Okay, you get to Moody State School. Would you like to guess, Michael, what time bedtime lights out was?
No, I don't have any idea. What
try
was
7:30 at night.
Oh, no.
Oh, yes. Now, for 2.5 hours.
Young minds are still active at 7:30 in the evening.
Well, their minds were not, the clientele that I was around was not nearly as independent, nor had they had the opportunities that I'd had. So I suppose 7:30 wasn't really that big a deal to them. Now, ask me why we had to go to bed at 7:30. The reason we had to go to bed at 7:30 was because they got us up at 5:30 in the morning. And if you want to know why did we get up at 5:30 in the morning, it was so that the independent, quasi-independent clients would have time. They got us up at 5:30 in the morning so that the more independent clients could dress themselves, because everybody works very slowly.
All right.
And you have to give time for these people to get dressed in order then to get to breakfast. Well, those of us who couldn't dress ourselves, which I could not, we're left in bed just waiting for somebody to dress us. And so we're getting up at 5:30, not getting dressed till around 7 anyway. So made really no sense, but that was the way the system worked. So with that type of bedtime, I couldn't change the getting up part, but I was very miserable going to bed at 7:30 because even if I went to sleep on time, I had 2.5 hours lying in the dark thinking about wishing I was home, which added to the homesickness, of course. So I met an individual came to me and wanted to talk to me. And I said, okay, I don't know what we're doing, but I'm willing to do whatever you ask. And this person was a psychologist. Now, I had no earthly idea, seriously, what a psychologist was or what they did for a living. But she had an office.
I know a lot of people feel the same way about that, but go ahead.
Well, we went down to her office and we talked, and she asked me questions, and I took all kinds of tests that I never thought of before in my life. Whatever this was, it sure beat having to walk and fall down. So I figured the best thing I could do is make real good friends with this lady, which I did. In the process of getting this done, she asked me, why was I so unhappy and what was wrong? I told her. And she said, well, let me see what I can do. Well, a decree came down that all of a sudden Roger got to stay up till 9 o'clock. Now, of course, I couldn't stay in the door. I mean, I'm sitting in the sunroom watching TV. Now, this is a side note to that story, but when Roger watches TV in the sunroom, you don't change channels. There's nobody there. They don't have remote controls. So you turn it on and you figure out there's more shows on Tuesday night on this channel that I like than the other one, so that's the one we watch.
Yeah, you were smart enough to do that.
So they would turn the TV on for me, and then I had a couple of them of the night crew that were kind enough to make me a cup of coffee. So I usually had a cup of coffee at night. Watching TV.
That sounds so like you, but go ahead.
All right. So this went on fine, and things were beginning to work out well. One other thing I need to tell you, as is true of any organization, there were different people on different shifts that didn't like the people who were on the other shift. Okay, and that's nothing unusual. That's typical. What was unusual about it was that my friends that had taken me to get coffee were on the afternoon shift.
Yeah.
There were enemies, and I put that in quotes, but there were enemies on the morning shift. I don't know how severe it was. I don't know what they did to each other, but there were. So these attendants would be in the room, and they were dressing up those of us who couldn't dress ourselves, and they would talk to each other, of course. And so I remember on a particular, this one attendant was named Augie, and she was a nice lady. I mean, there wasn't anything wrong with her, but she didn't like my friends, and she talked bad about my friends.
Uh-oh.
But up until now, there had never been anyone there who would report what was said to the other side. So I managed to always tell my friends on the afternoon shift what the morning shift had said about it. I'm not here to make friends. I'm here to survive.
Oh, Roger.
Okay. So now I needed to tell you that because my mother and dad get a phone call. Now, prior to leaving me in Galveston, they had visited with the doctors, of course. None of this was done in my presence. But they had visited with the doctors, and the doctors had told them what was going to happen, and so on and so forth. And my mother and dad both told the doctors that Roger's not going to accept this very well. And there's probably going to be some issues come up. To which the doctors told my mom and dad, we've dealt with this before. There's nothing to worry about. So mom said, okay, good luck. Well, mom and dad, about this time, get a phone call from Dr. Evans, head doctor. They get a phone call. And they said, Ms. Dykes, yes, your son is creating all kinds of havoc down here. He's got his own coffee breaks. He's staying up later than all the other kids. He's apparently getting food out of the kitchen. He has extra Coke and candy on Saturday, and he's got the staff down here at each other's throat. To which they said, we need you to talk to him and straighten this out. To which my mother replied, we warned you, and it's your problem.
Way to go, Mom. And she was right.
So I have completely overhauled indirectly a system. Now, the result of that conversation was all of a sudden word came down there. See, I thought the psychologist ran the show. She did to a point, but the doctor was over her.
Yeah.
So word came down that all this had to stop, that we couldn't do this anymore. It had to quit. This wasn't right. It wasn't fair. It wasn't traditional. So word came to me, everything stopped. And for about a week, everything stopped. After about a week, the caregivers started slipping. Now, we'd been just going and getting coffee. It was no big deal. Nobody cared. Now we're back to slipping off again like we did originally. So actually what we did, I missed very few coffee breaks, missed very little ice cream, candy and Cokes on Saturday. All that just kind of kept going, but it was now done under the dark of night instead of being done out in the open. Oh,
man.
So this is what happened over a period of time. Now, as far as what I was down there for, no, walking really never improved.
Well, it was physical therapy that you went to.
It was physical. Okay, the day consisted of physical therapy. It consisted of what they call functional. Now, functional was what I hated the most, because functional was you were up walking with the crutches and the braces around the parallel bars.
So, in other words, Roger, you fell down a lot. And
I fell down a lot, but let me explain even that, because I do not, when I fall, or when I fell back then and subsequently after that, I do not fall the way you do. Okay, I fall like a tree, which means my body stiffens up and I fall straight back, and my head hits the floor, and I can't get up once I'm down. So you can well imagine that this is not something you would enjoy doing, because the falling is a particular problem. Now, they did put a football helmet on me to theoretically protect my head, but I looked at that football helmet years later, and there was no padding in it. It was just a plastic football helmet. I guess it broke the shock a little bit, but not a whole lot. Because I could not walk very well, I was scared to death of falling. And I can remember days, the temperature in the room was fine, but I was sweating, because that's how much fear there was in me.
Rightly so, Roger.
Falling down.
Now, Roger, what we're going to do right here is this is a remarkable story, and there's lots of things that happened to you in the remaining part of that year that we still want to talk about, and there are outcomes to the year that you spent down there, changes that were made that are still in use today as a result of you being there. And we want to point that out, but we are out of time on this podcast. And what we want to tell folks is that in 3 weeks, your next episode will be coming up, and we're going to pick it up right here. And we're going to talk about the things that played out finally while you were there for the year. And we just thank you for sharing this so far. And you're right. You told me in the beginning, you said, there's no way we can do all this in one episode. And, I said, don't worry about it. Just start telling the story, and we'll figure out ways to get it all in. But Roger, it's an amazing tale. There are more amazing things. I think it even gets more amazing as you finish your story about the time that you spent in Galveston. And it also shows a lot in the way caregivers and caregiving in that day and time. What year was that?
1964.
So there's there hopefully many changes between 1964 and 2021 on care facilities like that, but some of them have your name on them, and we'll talk about that when we come back. So, Roger, thank you again for sharing.
Well, thank you for listening, and I hope the pod listeners enjoyed the podcast, and we'll pick it up again in 3 weeks.
All right. Adios, brother.
Thank you, and thank you for listening.
You've been listening to Roger Dykes Just Sayin. If you'd like to get a message to Roger, his Facebook account is listed as Roger Dykes. Become a friend, or you can send your questions and comments to rogerdykes51@gmail.com. That's ROGERDYKES51@gmail.com. Our podcast reveals a new episode every 3 weeks. Join us next time for our next episode of Roger Dykes Just Sayin. I'm Michael Shawn. On behalf of Roger Dykes, thanks for listening.